I don't want to get too much into draft talk right here, but it seems like the Vikings and Falcons are both going to make a pitch to Kirk Cousins. Welcome into the NFL on Fox podcast. I am Dave Helman, and as predicted, so much stuff has happened since the last time we talked to y'all here on the show. The league year, a little less than a week away. It starts March 13th. The new league year, free agency, all of the good stuff that comes with it. And suffice to say, teams are getting ready. Well, so are we here at the NFL on Fox podcast. The next time we talk to you, the negotiating window for free agency will have opened. So the next time we are in your ears on your screen, teams will have already started making moves. So we're going to get out in front of that. This is our free agency preview. We're going to get you covered on the biggest storylines, the biggest topics heading into free agency. My good buddies Eric Williams and Greg Auman of FoxSports.com join me. They wrote a wonderful top 50 free agent list, the best free agents available in 2024. Make sure you go check that out on the website, on the Fox Sports app to get you ready. And then when you've had a look at that, listen to our conversation. We're going to break down the biggest storylines for the biggest guys, and we will have you covered when everything starts next week. So as always, if you're not subscribed, please do. Maybe even leave us a nice review. Like, great show, good content. Guy talks too much, but yeah, 5 stars, anything like that. That would be really great. If you want to do that on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you get them, you can follow us on all your socials at NFL on Fox Pod. We'll be here all through the free agency frenzy, the first days, the first week, and then, free agency goes on for a month. The signings are going to be ongoing, probably up until the start of April, when teams really focus in on the NFL draft. So we got you covered. Make sure you're following all that good stuff. Free agency preview coming up. Before we do that, like I said, it's been a flurry of activity in the NFL as teams get ready for the spending process. So we're just going to catch you up since the last time I talked to you. Thank you so much to Ari Myrov at My Sports Update for just putting this all in a tweet that I can read right here. We talked about the franchise tag deadline. That was Tuesday, and most of our predictions came true. Michael Pittman of the Colts, Jalen Johnson of the Chicago Bears, Justin Madubuike of the Baltimore Ravens, Antoine Winfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Josh Allen of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Brian Burns of the Carolina Panthers, all have been franchise tagged. That goes along with L'Jarius Sneed, who we already knew was going to be franchise tagged, as well as T. Higgins. So, as you're going to hear in our free agency preview, a lot of the big names in this free agency cycle have been franchise tagged. Patriots safety Kyle Duggar has also been transition tagged. It's an accounting procedure. Don't worry about it. Basically, the Patriots are trying to save $4 million by giving him that tag instead of the franchise tag. Few deals being thrown out as well. Going to shout out my guy Dalton Schultz, former Cowboys tight end, now secured long-term with the Houston Texans, signed a 3-year, $36 million extension to stay in Houston after his fantastic season last year signing. Looks like C.J. Stroud's going to keep his tight end option for the foreseeable future. That's really exciting. Houston also agreeing to a deal with their kicker, Kaimi Fairbairn. It's been thinking about, Mike Evans signing ahead of time as well. Now the Texans getting deals done with a couple of guys also. It's been impressive to see how many teams have been able to get things done despite the looming specter of free agency. It seems like there's a lot of willingness to cooperate around the NFL right now. Another re-signing worth mentioning, the Lions are bringing back cornerback Emmanuel Mosley on a 1-year deal. And then this is what you expect to see the week before free agency. Teams shedding salary all over the NFL. The Seahawks, the biggest one, they cut safeties Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs, as well as tight end Will Dissly, freeing up something like $20 million in money ahead of free agency. Quandre Diggs is the interesting one. I'm guessing he is going to have a robust market. Chargers cut Eric Kendricks, the former Minnesota Viking, current Charger. Just guessing, Mike Zimmer's the new defensive coordinator in Dallas, longtime head coach in Minnesota. Just guessing, Eric Kendricks might have a star on his helmet before it's all said and done. New York Jets cutting tight end CJ Uzomah, Panthers cutting tight end Hayden Hurst. Like I said, this is all expected because teams have to get ready to go throw that money at other people next week. That is the bulk of the show. That's what we're going to get into right now. Like I said, the league year starts Wednesday, March 13th. That is when you can sign free agents. But the tampering window, the negotiating window, that starts March 11th. So as soon as Monday afternoon, teams can start agreeing in principle to deals, bringing on free agents. It is coming up really quickly. And to help me with that, as promised, Eric Williams, Greg Auman, our own guys here at foxsports.com, join me to preview the big storylines, the big names to know in the 2024 free agent class. All right, guys, y'all feel like the perfect people to talk to preview free agency. You helped collaborate on our own Fox Sports top 50 free agent list for this coming league year. And I'm going to start it off on a bit of a down note because it's starting to feel a little bit anticlimactic around here. Like if you're somebody that gets into the intrigue and the juice of free agency and all the big deals getting signed, franchise tag deadline was Tuesday, March 5th. And after it was over, it feels like a lot of the marquee names are off the market. I looked it up on y'all's list. If you include Mike Evans, who's obviously not tagged, but he has already agreed to a major deal with the Buccaneers. If you include him, 9 of y'all's top 15 free agents are off the market already before we even start this. So Eric, I'll start with you. How do you see that affecting the spending at the start of free agency? Obviously, there's still some really intriguing names out there, but a lot of the biggest ones are going to be staying with their current teams.
Yeah, I mean, this is what happens traditionally in free agency, and it's why the NFL has it set up that way, so owners can hang on to their top guys by franchise tagging them, and keeping them on their team or giving the team the opportunity to do that. I think it waters down some of the top players that are going to hit the free agent market. So if you're a team that has some money to spend and wanted to sign somebody like like Justin Matabuke, and who was a good player for the Ravens, he's no longer available, so you now have to move to the next guy on your list. But there's still a lot of good players that are available. Guys are still going to get signed to what we deem as pretty high contracts, maybe higher than we deem their value. So there's still plenty of guys that are going to hit the open market and be available for teams to bid on.
I'm curious, and I'm sorry if I'm asking you to predict the future, but there are some heavy hitters among these guys that have been franchise tagged, right? Whether you want to talk about Brian Burns, whose saga is ongoing in Carolina, feels like it's been 2 or 3 years at this point that he has been in a contract dispute with the Panthers. T. Higgins is another similar name like that, where people have been speculating about his future. Greg, I'll ask you this because I mentioned Brian Burns. Antoine Winfield is another one. There are some guys like Winfield where it just, this feels like a placeholder. You use the franchise tag to buy yourself 4 more months, and Antoine Winfield will very likely stay a Buccaneer. A, am I right about that? But B, how do you see this shaking out with some of these other guys? Which of these players do you see re-signing for sure, and which ones might be playing for or heading for a year where they're truly playing on the franchise tag?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, like you said, I think Antoine Winfield's definitely at the other end of the spectrum where it could be a week. I mean, 2 years ago, the Bucs tagged Chris Godwin, and a week later they had a long-term extension. So I think he wants to be there. I think they want him there. And now it's just a matter. I think the Bucs are willing to make him the highest paid safety in the league. It's just a matter of working out the details of it. And the only reason he has the tag is you hit that deadline, or if you don't get that tag in, then you have the risk of losing somebody. I do think Brian Burns is probably the other extreme. They've been trying to get a long-term deal for Brian Burns for a long time, and it hasn't happened. And we all know the Panthers had lucrative offers they turned down, multiple first-round picks. They're probably not going to get that now, but I think they're at the point where if you're a franchise that's struggling and needs as much as Carolina does to get extra draft picks, to get $24 million in cap space, they can upgrade a ton of positions. They can find 4 or 5 starters for that money, and that might do them better than keeping the best player, the most elite player on their team. But yeah, in the middle, all these defensive studs. I don't know if Snead stays with the Chiefs. I don't know if Jalen Johnson stays with the Bears, but I think this is that middle ground where at least, you've got him for this year. If it gets to be late summer and you haven't worked something out, you can use the leverage of, hey, you don't want to get traded. You don't want us to move on with you. Maybe that helps get a deal done. But the tag means different things to different teams and different players for sure.
All right, so let's turn the focus to the guys that are available. And like I said, there are still some really good ones. Chris Jones is number one on y'all's list. Let's start there. Eric, this feels interesting to me just because, I mean, Chris Jones he's an incredible talent. I don't think I need to say a whole lot about what Chris Jones means to the Chiefs, and he hasn't been tagged, and yet it feels like all the momentum suggests that he's going to stay in Kansas City. Or is that just like, is that like beer goggles, like post-championship vibes, and once the market opens, that might change? Or what do you see for Chris Jones when teams are actually allowed to talk to him?
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Dave. I don't know what his mental state was when he made that statement at the parade that he was coming back. I think his agent would like to, hey, pump the brakes there. Let me do some negotiating before you make that statement. I think that Chris Jones has reached the level of Aaron Donald in terms of his impact. I can't believe I'm saying that as a person that covered, Aaron on a regular basis for 2 years. But when you watched him play in the Super Bowl and the impact that he had in the postseason, I think he's now reached that level and probably deserves to be paid in that same range, which is, low to mid 30s annually. With where the Chiefs are in the cap, not sure how they're going to get that done in terms of the financial finagling that they're going to have to do to make it happen. But certainly they seem committed to having him there, at least for the upcoming season in order to defend their title. And I think their defense is much different, and they're not able to do what they can do on the back end if he's not there on a consistent basis on the front end. So I expect that they're going to figure out how to get it done, but we'll see.
The other thing that makes it interesting is, and we talked about all these guys that have been franchise tagged, because of where they are financially, the Dolphins have very noteworthy not tagged Christian Wilkins, who I don't think anybody puts Christian Wilkins on the same tier as Chris Jones, but he is a phenomenal player. And guys like this don't hit free agency very often. I think these are both going to be very eye-popping numbers. I feel a little bit more confident that Chris Jones will stay with his team, whereas I think Christian Wilkins is very, very likely gone from Miami. But how this stuff works out, and does Chris Jones need to sign before Christian Wilkins settles on a number, that type of stuff, I think is going to be very intriguing next week.
Yeah, no doubt. And Christian, because of his age, is unique, in terms of a defensive tackle that is that talented, hitting the free agent market. Last year the Niners were able to sign Hargrave, and I think he improved their defense. And I think this is something similar. If you're a team, perhaps like the Lions that got to the NFC title game last year, and you need interior defensive line help, that's going to kind of push your team over the top, and you're willing to spend some cash. I think that's a player that you look hard at. That's going to kind of change the trajectory of what you're able to do defensively.
I had something different in mind for Greg, because Greg, I appreciate the irony here. You cover the NFC South, and obviously somebody had to win that division, but the intrigue during the season was not all that great. And so for instance, you weren't on the pod as often as Eric was talking about the 49ers and their run to the Super Bowl, but the NFC South is incredibly interesting when you're talking about resetting the league year, because the NFC South is in the thick of it for arguably the two most important free agents in this class of free agents. Obviously, the Atlanta Falcons have been strongly linked to Kirk Cousins here over the last week or so. And Baker Mayfield as well is angling for a new deal, maybe in Tampa Bay. Let's start with Kirk. Do you buy the validity it's getting a little crazy. Like we're connecting the dots that his wife is from Atlanta. Kyle Pitts is responding to rumors on social media that he maybe had an agreement with Kirk Cousins about wearing number 8. I mean, how much validity do you think there is to this?
No, I think there's something to it. There might be a little bit more smoke than fire at this point. I'm not sure when the tampering window for jersey number negotiation begins in the NFL, but it makes sense. If you look at the Falcons, to me, last year, what killed them was kind of that summer of inaction, of not pursuing a free agent, of not chasing Lamar Jackson, of not moving up in the draft, and being content to move forward with Des Ridder as their guy at quarterback. That's why Arthur Smith got fired. It's why they're 7-10 for a third year in a row. So it will not surprise me at all if Raheem Morris, if Terry Fontenot take the opposite tack and they absolutely swing for the fences. That could mean giving Kirk Cousins at 35 coming off an Achilles $40 million a year. It could mean trading for Justin Fields. It could mean moving up into the top 3 of the draft. I don't think they'll make the same mistake twice. Cousins would be the most glaring, write a huge check and see what happens. I think it makes sense. I think it's a talented team that finished better than the Vikings did last year. I think he makes them a team that would be expected to be a playoff team. Could probably use another receiver to throw to. But again, it should be a similar offense to what he had with O'Connell in Minnesota. Kind of that Rams-based. Everybody spent a little bit of time in Los Angeles with McKay, so the offenses are all about the same. It would make a lot of sense. If they like Fields would be less expensive, cost a little bit of draft picks, maybe have a little bit more long-term upside. But in terms of making sure this Falcons team won't be confused with last year's, starting your offseason by signing Kirk Cousins is a big step in that direction.
Yeah, I think, it sends a pretty clear signal when Arthur Smith, the former head coach, gets fired largely because of what they didn't do at quarterback. I think they're going to fix it. It's fascinating, and I don't want to get too much into draft talk right here, but it seems like the Vikings and Falcons are both going to make a pitch to Kirk Cousins. Maybe somebody else comes in, but right now it feels like a good guess one of those teams is going to wind up with him. And then the other team, like you mentioned Justin Fields, you also might have to pivot to this year's rookie class. And it's interesting to think the team that loses this sweepstakes might be doing something bold in the draft to get up to take a Jaden Daniels or a JJ McCarthy, whoever it winds up being. It's always interesting to think about how you kind of allocate those resources of like, okay, if we don't get Kirk Cousins, do we have what it takes to answer this question another way?
Right. And it's all in play. That's the cool thing for Atlanta is that they're close enough at 8 where they're higher up than Carolina was when they traded up last year. So to go from 8 to 3, which probably gets you Jaden Daniels, it'll cost their second round pick. It'll cost next year's first round pick probably. But that seems like it would be in play. And obviously that costs less from a dollar standpoint than giving Kirk Cousins probably 2 years and $80 million fully guaranteed. So they just have to decide, are you going to get older and have a more known commodity at quarterback, or can you win kind of like Houston did with a young quarterback? Fields wouldn't be as young, but potentially a rookie quarterback on what would otherwise be a playoff caliber team in Atlanta. These are kind of the first dominoes when you think about how this free agency it shakes out. I think it starts with your kingpin top dollar quarterbacks. There's the chalk version where Cousins stays in Minnesota, Baker Mayfield stays in Tampa. But then there's also versions that are more chaotic where, okay, if Cousins goes to Atlanta, now the Vikings are suddenly players. Do they get Russell Wilson? Where do they go? You have these teams that are playoff caliber teams. If they have the right quarterback, they're not going to sit back, I don't think. So it'll be fun to see which scenario kind of starts things off in the next week here.
All right, let's talk about the other guy, Baker Mayfield. And I think both of y'all have some excellent insight that you can add to this, because Baker is in a very similar situation to Geno Smith, who, Eric, you cover the Seattle Seahawks and what they wound up doing with Geno. Greg, let's start with just brass tacks. I mean, where do you think it stands with Baker and the Buccaneers? I mean, as soon as Mike Evans signed on Monday, all the smoke was like, don't be surprised if Baker doesn't make it to free agency either. Still have not quite a week because the negotiating window opens on Monday, but they do have plenty of time to still work something out. Do you have any inkling as to whether that might happen?
I think he'll be back. I think everything the Bucs have done to this point has been with an eye towards reminding Baker that he has familiarity and comfort and things he knows in Tampa that he won't have anywhere else. Even again, like there's a little bit of intrigue when Dave Canales and Brad Idzik leave to go to Carolina. Now he's going to have a new offense. They go out of their way to go get Liam Cohen, to get a coordinator he's worked with in the past. A guy that is fine no matter who your quarterback is, but he has a specific relationship with Baker Mayfield that helps that situation. So I look at what Baker was doing before he got to the Bucs, and it's a long, wandering 3 teams in 1 year. not a fun time. So for him to have the success he had in Tampa, to reestablish himself with a new home, a city he likes, a fan base that's embraced him, a team that has made him a leader, I don't know that there's enough money from an outside offer to convince him to roll the dice and move his family and start from scratch in a new city when he has a good situation here in Tampa. I don't know what that dollar value is in terms of 27 a year, 33 a year. It's kind of like what's the smallest amount of money that'll make him feel valued, but allow them to surround him with the kind of talent you need to repeat as a division champ.
And that goes back to my point. I think what played out with Geno Smith and the Seahawks feels awfully similar to what's going on with Baker Mayfield. I don't know what the number's going to be, but I would imagine the deal that Baker eventually signs will look at least somewhat reminiscent of that deal that Geno got in Seattle. 3 years, $75 million. Maybe it's an extra year. Maybe it's a little bit more money, but I would imagine it's a similar ballpark. Eric, I'm curious. I don't think the Seahawks regret that move. I mean, Geno Smith played good football last year, but a year or so on from that deal and now a new coaching staff in place, how do you think Seattle feels about that? Like, it doesn't seem on the outside like they feel like they've completely answered their quarterback question, or have they?
I think they told us how they felt about the deal by going up and picking up the guaranteed money for the second season. I think they're okay with Geno being on the roster at the number that he's going to be at. But I also feel like they know that they need a guy that can kind of take them to the next level at the quarterback position in order to compete in the NFC West when you talk about Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay. So while they're committed to Geno for 2024, I also feel like they're gonna draft a quarterback at some point in this year's draft as a developmental guy to move on, with in the next year or two, because I just feel like they need a guy that gives them a little more juice from that position in order to compete not only in the division but to compete for a Super Bowl. Again, this is a franchise that's drafted two quarterbacks in 14 years since John Schneider has been the GM and Pete obviously has been the head coach. And Schneider comes from Green Bay, where they had a history of drafting developmental quarterbacks almost every year. So he's kind of went away from that. I think he wants to get back to that way of putting a roster together.
And that's, I think that's a similar situation at Tampa. Maybe it sounds harsh, but this feels like a situation. I mean, Baker Mayfield can clearly win you the division. He's already done it. And if he's not setting the market at quarterback, which I don't think he will, then Tampa Bay can obviously put a really good roster around him. But it's going to be interesting to see what that limit is and how long that satisfies the Buccaneers. Because, like I said, I mean, you can win with Geno Smith. Geno Smith has played good football in Seattle, but how long can you be satisfied with that when you are competing against rosters like San Francisco or star quarterbacks like some of the young guys coming into the league? So, I mean, Greg, what is your? I mean, the vibes in Tampa seem so good. Don't get me wrong, and I love that story. But I wonder what the long-term outlook is here, especially you consider Mike Evans. How much longer will he play after this deal that he just signed? Chris Godwin is another guy that's getting older, that's had injury issues. I wonder what the window is for the Buccaneers to look like this if they bring Baker Mayfield back.
Right. It's probably, I would think he and Mike are kind of on that same clock where you got 2 more years to make something happen, and then they'll probably have decisions to make from there. This still has very much the core of their Super Bowl team from 4 years ago. When you think about Evans and Levante David, Tristan Wirfs, Antoine Winfield, all those types are all still here. Vita Vea in the middle. You got the young core of that team is still there. They've kind of been able to, I don't want to say rebrand, but move on from Brady. It's one of those where I think you forget because you had 3 years of Tom Brady in Tampa, but this is a franchise that hasn't had a lot of great quarterback play in its existence. So what Baker did last year isn't 45 touchdowns elite, but it's one of the better non-Brady Bucs quarterback seasons. So if you can get that, if you can count on the leadership aspect of what he did for this locker room, I think they're definitely okay with another year or two of that and then moving forward from there.
One last guy I want to get to, and I'll give it to both of y'all because it's an interesting one. The top prospect, I think we've covered everybody else that is going to be available next week, down to y'all's number 12 guy out of 50, and that is the curious case of Danielle Hunter, who doesn't really look like your usual premier free agent. He's already signed a big contract. He's 29 years old. This isn't your typical 25, 26-year-old in the prime of his career, and yet had an amazing season playing for Brian Flores last year, clearly has a lot of juice left in the tank. I'm curious what y'all think his market looks like and what the bidding war looks like for a guy who, like I said, maybe isn't your stereotypical, marquee free agent at this point in his career.
I think it'll be strong. I mean, you look at his numbers, again, a little bit older than your Burns and Josh Allen. So maybe you don't think of it long term, but I mean, he had 16 and a half sacks last year, led the NFL in tackles for loss, probably gets lost in the player of the year type things because he's not as flashy as a Watt, as a Crosby, as a as Miles in Cleveland. There's other people that probably get more attention than him, but as maybe the 5th or 6th best pass rusher in the league last year, really got a lot done. Production levels were better than they were the year before. I think he's going to be a good value. Probably won't be a $100 million contract, but I think he's going to give somebody Pro Bowl level pass rushing for at least the next 2 years before you start worrying about how old he is.
To add to what Greg said, he plays a premium position, and then edge rushers tend to still be productive into their late 20s, early 30s. And so I think you can still count on a couple years of him playing at the level that he's at right now. So if you're a team that feel like you're a pass rusher away, I think you definitely take a look at him.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit. And Javon Hargrave is not quite as old as Danielle Hunter, I don't believe. But it reminds me of the situation last year. Eventually, Eric, the Niners run out of cap space, right? Like eventually the Niners can't do this too, right? But I do, you mentioned being a pass rusher away. There's got to be a team like that out there that's like, wait, Danielle Hunter is available to us and maybe we don't have to pay him. We don't have to pay him Nick Bosa type money, but for a good payday, we can add a 16 sack caliber player to the roster. Yeah, I would imagine there's going to be some very good teams that have some interest in that.
Dave, the Saints don't seem to run out of cap space, so maybe they could just keep pushing it out.
That's a really good point. And the Saints aren't paying. The Saints quarterback does not cost what Brock Purdy costs. So shoot, maybe there's really no limit to what the Niners can do.
Yeah. And another team in the NFC West, the Rams. The Rams are kind of my trendy pick to go to the Super Bowl next year, based on what they're able to do last year with such a young team. And if they can add another pass rusher to what they have already in Donald and Kobe Turner and Young, I think that makes them pretty dangerous on the defensive side of the football. So, a guy like Hunter would make sense. A couple of years ago, they signed Floyd. Who's a free agent again with the Bills, and again, a guy like that kind of makes a lot of sense because he's working off Aaron Donald, so he's going to get singled up, and again, guys around the league see that and know they can put up numbers if they go to Los Angeles.
I like that pick a lot. I would be mad at you for saying that about the Rams because I feel that way about the Rams, but I've planted my flag on the Green Bay Packers as my surging team for 2024. All right. This storyline, you couldn't really draw it up better based on where we've been over the last year. Because last year, it was the summer of the angry running backs. It was the never-ending news cycle of when are we going to value this position again? Should we value this position? And we're going to find out in very clear terms, because I can't remember a year where so many of the biggest names at the position are hitting free agency at the same time. Thanks to these teams not wanting to use franchise tags on them again, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, and Tony Pollard are all hitting free agency. Throw in Austin Eckler and Derrick Henry as well. And you've basically got, other than Christian McCaffrey, you've got every big name running back from the last half decade hitting the market at once. What do you guys expect? Like, surely these guys can still get solid deals on the open market. Greg, I'll start it with you because I'm going to be bummed out for them if at least a couple of these guys can't get a nice payday here next week.
Right. I mean, like $10 million a year. Okay. That's third receiver money. That's Dalton Schultz money in the NFL. And it'll look like a jackpot with how we've devalued running backs in the NFL. So again, I'll start at 10. Maybe we'll say 12 million a year, which is crazy monopoly money, crazy spending for running backs in today's NFL. But again, this is Saquon Barkley. This is Josh Jacobs. These are young running backs. There's probably some high usage at work there. I don't think they're going to spend as much to get Derrick Henry because there's a lot of tread on those, a lot of tread that's worn off those tires. I think Barkley and Jacobs are still both backs that have great football ahead of them. I'm intrigued to see how Tony Pollard fits in. Maybe not as a dominant primary bell cow back, but as a guy that can still catch a million passes and help somebody as a a shared role back. Austin Eckler, I'm intrigued to see what he can do. It's definitely the position where there's probably the highest volume of top half of the league talent that's not only available, but probably available at good value. So for me, it starts with Jacobs and Barkley because they're the youngest guys in that group, but it definitely gives them a chance to reestablish themselves as stars in a way they probably haven't been since really early in their careers.
It's an interesting conversation because, like you said, Dave, it was so much in the news last year. They met as a group. There was talk about them, creating their own union, to kind of, represent themselves. And those guys were tagged, so they, teams tagged them at 10 million, and now the franchise tag goes up to 12 million, and nobody tags them. So that kind of tells you how the teams feel about them. I think if you're a running back, I think you have to go year to year at this point. Try to get what you can this year, get the most that you can in terms of guaranteed money, and then go out and produce, and then do it again next year. And then I think also, as Greg mentioned, I think fit's going to be really important. If you're one of these guys, you have to really find a team that's going to give you the best opportunity to put up good numbers. I think, again, like if you're Austin Eckler, I think the Raiders make sense because, Tom Telesco's there as a GM. That division. They know who you are as a player. And then I think you saw what Jacobs could do in that offense. And I think Austin's even more dynamic as a pass catcher. But I think fit's going to be important. And then I think you're going to have to take a little bit of humble pie and maybe not look for as many years and look more in terms of the guarantee.
I think more so than most positions, that's such an interesting conversation. Because, for instance, if you're Josh Jacobs, and I know it's trendy not to want to pay running backs, like all the stats nerds will tell you it's a bad idea. And for the most part, I agree with that. But in a circumstance like Josh Jacobs, the guy just turned 26 years old. He does have, obviously, he's got wear. He's one of the best feature backs in the NFL. But at the age of just 26, and remember, he didn't carry the ball a lot in college. He only had 1 year as a starter at Alabama. As far as running backs go, that's not as much mileage as it could be. I would gladly sign this guy to a big deal, knowing that I can get at least 2 or 3 more really, really good years out of him. But Eric, you make the interesting point. It feels so important to weigh this stuff. Like if you're Josh Jacobs, would you take a 4-year deal with a lot of guarantees, knowing that team is going to run you into the ground most likely because of what they're paying you? Or do you maybe take a 1-year deal, 2-year deal with less security, maybe even a little bit less money, but knowing maybe you'll be in a better situation, maybe your usage will be more favorable, and you'll be in a position to cash in one more time when you're 28, let's say. Like I think the dynamics of that are fascinating. And I think it's something that running backs probably need to weigh a little bit heavier than almost any other position in the league.
I agree, Dave, because your value is going to change, I think, dramatically year to year. And so you want to be able to hit the market as quick as you can to be able to cash in on that value, particularly if you have a good year. If you go out there and you put 1,500 scrimmage yards, and now you're locked into this longer term deal where maybe your value goes up, but you can't take advantage of it. I think that's something to think about, that maybe other positions, like receiver, obviously quarterback, are maybe not thinking as much about.
I wouldn't take more than a 2-year deal. I'd give yourself the chance to reset your value. These are good backs that are not coming off terrible seasons, and there's not much of a market for them. So again, these things can change so much. If we had this conversation 2 years ago, we certainly would be talking about Ezekiel Elliott probably, and he's not in that conversation at all. So it's a fleeting existence as a top tier NFL running back. But if I'm them, even if the money's good, if you get 2 and 20, it's a chance to reset yourself in 2 years. Your cap's going to be 275, 280 in 2 years. Maybe the league will come to embrace the running portion of the NFL offense, and maybe they're paying more than. I wouldn't lock myself in too long at today's running back rates.
I think that's the number that, yeah, if I was in that market as a running back and Josh Jacobs, I think I'd be looking at 2 years 20.
I would sign that in a heartbeat, and I would offer that in a heartbeat if I were a team that could get Josh Jacobs. All right, really quickly, we're running out of time a little bit, and I'm just going to put you all on the spot because, I mean, the mega deals are going to come down so quickly. It always feels like it's over in 36, 48 hours. But as free agency goes, is there a signing, a name, a fit that excites you on a lower level, maybe beyond like the 10 or 15 names that we're talking about here? Is there something you have your eye on that really intrigues you here over the next week or so?
I can't believe we haven't talked about him. I know he's not a free agent, but Russell Wilson is going to get paid a lot of money by the Denver Broncos. And I really feel like he's a wild card in all this. If you're able to get Russell at a minimum, and you're the Minnesota Vikings, and then you can build around that, I think he makes a lot of sense. I think teams have to kind of, evaluate that. Am I going to pay Kirk Cousins 40, or am I going to pay Russell Wilson minimum and then build around him and have that extra cap space to look at? So to me, I don't know if he's being, well, obviously he's being talked about a lot just because of what happened there. But in terms of the value he brings to the team, because somebody else is paying him kind of like an NBA salary, I think it's interesting.
I think it's the biggest gamble in this draft, and it's not a financial gamble at all. These teams will write $100 million checks and not blink. And with Russ, you have to hand him the keys to your franchise. You're giving your starting quarterback $1.2 million. And it's just a 1 year weird kind of tryst. He might want $30 million again a year from now. You want him to want that because it means he had a good year. It means that while you had him, you have to convince him it's that weird kind of recruiting almost. It's not free agency. He gets to go to the team he thinks gives him the best chance to reestablish himself as a top tier quarterback. So if you're Minnesota, if you're Atlanta, if you're a team that's seen as only needing a quarterback to be a playoff team, you get Russ to get you there, and it might be, hey, thanks again, best of luck in free agency. Maybe you get a comp pick out of it, but it's $1 million. So you can, like you said, you can get Russ and Christian Wilkins and not Madubuike, but you can get Chris Jones and Russell Wilson for the price of Cousins right now. It's a strange thing, but I'll be intrigued to see which NFL team is kind of risky enough to try it.
I hesitate to say it because who knows how it works out. But I mean, we just spent 8 minutes talking about Baker Mayfield. I mean, how much better does Russell Wilson's stat line from last year look if he's making $3 million instead of whatever his number was in Denver, 40? So I definitely think the expectations of your contract play into that. And Russell Wilson, while certainly was not at the level he was 3 or 4 years ago, he played well enough last year that if you get him on the cheap, you're probably going to feel good about that. And yeah, y'all are right. If you have Russell Wilson playing for the bare minimum, who knows what else you can do in free agency. That's definitely going to be interesting to watch. Guys, I could talk to you about this all day. We do have to run, unfortunately. I appreciate it so much. I look forward to seeing how the dominoes fall. It all starts Monday. Remember, the league year opens Wednesday, but the negotiating window basically means all of these deals can get agreed to in principle starting on Monday afternoon. So have your calendars marked. Guys, I appreciate it as always, and I'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Good, Dave. Take care.
That does it for the show. We will be back next week. And like I said, next time you hear us, free agency will have started. We will be discussing deals, at least agreed to in principle. It's going to move really quickly. if you need to further prepare, like I said, Eric and Greg did a great job previewing the biggest free agents available in 2024. Go check out their article, foxsports.com and the Fox Sports app. We will be back next week to start breaking it down. The league year begins. Hope is in the air. We'll see where all the movement takes us, who signs who agrees to what. So make sure you're subscribed. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, subscribe to the YouTube channel, wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you get your NFL news. We're on all the socials at NFL on Fox Pod. You know where to find us. You can't say you don't, because I say it every show. We appreciate the support so much, and we will be back next week to break down what it all means as the league year begins. I appreciate it. I'll talk to y'all next time.